This tutorial is a request from a subscriber via here. I hope I got your name correct. I'm also using a separate audio device which should improve the quality. So today I'm going to be trying a new landscape scene that I haven't done before. This is basically a tea plantation. Can't exactly remember where this photograph is from. I'll put it in the description. I'll have to check the 𝗘𝗥𝗖𝗡𝗏 reference. Paper that I'm using is basically from a little block of Saunders Waterford. So it's a pretty old block that I got as a present. I think it was last year, and this is the last bit of paper left, so I thought I'd finish it off by doing something a bit different. So what I'm going to do, the sky looks quite interesting, and firstly what I'll need is basically to get in a lot of these kind of cloud shapes and just try to get in some of these hills and things like that. In the background too, I'll try to make them maybe have a bit of wet on wet effect, and we'll have to move through and get in the yellow as well, yellow and green. So let's see what we can do. Got a 3/4 inch flat brush. The paper's flat as well. I don't really have it on a slant, and just gonna go in quickly like that with some of this water and wet the sky. Just pre-wet it a little. Okay. Good thing about these blocks is that they save so much time. Don't have to tape down the sides. And even then, even when I have loose sheets, I don't tape them down anyway. Find a lot of the time that just takes a lot of effort to set up, and I just want to get straight into it. So picking up a bit of this kind of greyish mix. I need a bit more blue in there. Okay, water that down a bit, and let's get in some colour into the sky. Maybe a bit more cerulean blue up the top. Just want to keep things simple. Okay, leaving bits of white as well in the sky. Maybe a bit more blue in the corners. Just darken that up a bit, and here as well. Mop that up slightly. Okay, and I'm going to go down here and just wet this area of the mountain just slightly, maybe around here as well. I'm following this reference very loosely, so not worrying too much about getting it looking the same. Let that kind of dry off a little bit first, and just want to grab some more of this blue and add in some darker areas in the clouds, maybe a bit of purple too. Really enjoy working wet onto wet. Okay. More blue up the top there, like that. For some reason, this cobalt blue that I've got just takes forever to activate. Okay, so I'm just going to go now and get in some of this mountain in the background. Dry off the brush a little bit. Let's give that a try. Okay, I reckon it needs to be just a little bit darker, like that. And I'm going to let that melt in to the background a bit. That. Maybe carry that onto the side a little. And we'll do the same here on this side too. Bring it down a little and just left a bit of a gap here as well. That. Color the whole thing in. And it kind of goes off into the distance here, like that. So just remember to keep it pretty light still, but darker than the sky. Okay, now what I'm going to do is I'm really just going to get in a lot of this green in here. So a little trick that I use is I'll just go in straight away with the yellow, and I've already got a bit of blue on my brush, but a lot of this is going to turn to green anyway. So get in this wash of green and help it to merge as well with the mountains in the background. It's really just getting in that layer. It's very hard for me to get a pure yellow because I've just got some of this blue mixed in. And let that all mix. Touch that edge here, like that. This is a cadmium yellow that I'm using. Which is now turned into a bit of a green. And I'm going to carry this all the way down the page. And good thing is afterwards we're going to be able to add in some blue and get in some details of the darker areas of green. But this is just going to be the background layer. And it's becoming more yellow as I move down the front. Let me pick up this other yellow. This is a 𝗘𝗕𝗔𝗬 yellow. A bit warmer. More water in here. It might swap to a bigger brush as well. This is a, I think it's a 3/4 inch to make things quicker. Okay. Just get it all in. Fantastic. Okay. Now all of this is still pretty wet, and my aim is to get in some of these hills and things in the background. So I'm swapping over now to a smaller flat brush, and let's see what we can do. I'm going to pick up some of this cobalt blue and make sure it's light enough. Well, let's just add in some darker areas here. Indicate more than anything. Kind of goes up a bit, gets a bit darker in the corner. It's the exciting thing, you never know what's going to happen when you paint wet into wet. Though as you keep doing it and keep practicing, you'll be able to get some consistent effects. So I'm letting a lot of this mixing occur on the paper. It's another hill, and going to keep on doing that, leaving these little bits of lighter green/yellow coming through. Okay, they just need to be impressions. Don't spend too much time trying to get them looking like hills. They'll end up looking like them anyway if you follow this sort of loose style that I'm using. Okay, now near the middle there's a kind of bush here, which I'll indicate like that, and bits of darker green here, starting to dry off a little bit at the bottom. I've got a trick for this, and keep a little spray bottle with me. Just keeps things wet for a little while longer. Okay, so getting back into it. There we go. And I'm actually going to now swap to a larger flat brush. This is going to be interesting because the greens in here need to be darker. Well, just add in some of the darks on the left hand side first. Just a little bit of detail. And I'll swap to a little fan brush. I think this will just stop it from spreading too much. There's actually some trees that are branching off into the top here, so I'm gonna do a quick indication of that. I got a little round brush. This is the one I use for really messy sort of effects. And I'm just gonna indicate some leaves up the top here, like that. And that's not the end, we can go in and add more in later if we need to. Okay. And continue my way down in here to darken up that green again. So again, just grabbing that blue, letting it mix slightly. There's a kind of undulation here and a slope. It sort of just slopes going upwards, and then it there's an area here as well. So I'll firstly get in the general color and then work on some of these separators. A lot of this is wet into wet. I mean, everything I'm doing now is wet into wet. Leave this bit of light here, that's going to really help. The main thing I'm doing is just looking at the dark areas of the painting and trying to get in some of those details here as well. This part probably needs to be re-wet slightly. Oops, I've used the wrong side of the brush. What am I doing? Okay, so we'll go through, get in a bit of detail here, and this corner is also darker slightly here. Like that. But it finishes with a little section that kind of cutting across. Okay. More blue in this section. Swapping over to the fan brush again. Darker near the base, like that. There's also some dark areas of this tree to the corner, which I'm gonna just indicate, like that. Quite subtle. Okay. Now let's just have a look how dry this is. What we can do now is start going in and getting a bit more detail in the darker areas in here. So I'm going to mix up some cobalt blue with sepia. Doesn't matter what blue it is, cobalt blue, or you can use ultramarine blue as well. Just a dark color. And you want to wait until it's not dry but the paper's still damp, and you can just test it out. So get a sort of thick layer of this dark paint, dry off the brush a bit. Then what you want to do is just figure out where these areas are, where there's darker separations, and just indicate wet onto wet, like that. You only get one go at this, so make sure that you're waiting just until the paper is almost dry. If you get some wet on dry effects, that's better than going in too early and it all spreading out and becoming a big mess. Okay. This area also just needs to be a bit darker here. Okay. Again, grabbing that paint, that darker paint, and gonna indicate some of these little separations like that. Do the ones closer first. There. Actually quite complicated. Some of them join up. I've never been to a tea plantation before. This is really my first time seeing what they look like. I think I've seen pictures, on TV and things, but definitely not so often. This looks like quite an interesting place to visit. Okay, just trying to keep these as random as possible, and also with the perspective to get them going smaller in the distance. I'm going to swap to a smaller brush here. Just a little round brush, see if it even holds enough paint. Yeah, that should do it. Okay. Kind of go up and down. Get some areas where the paint's kind of starting to dry off as well. Just trying to get it to merge into the distance and melt to the background more. You know, at this point you can go through some of the areas and emphasize darkness in some bits and pieces. So here in the foreground especially, that. Maybe some of the lines also running up this direction. These are kind of underlaying going downwards, and then they're going across and moving up again. Oops, that was too much. So be careful with the water concentration as well. Don't want stuff like this going on. There's nothing I can do much about that anymore. So I'll continue on, and actually up in the distance here I want to have some kind of vertical lines, because they branch, kind of go off in this direction there. However, it's a bit dry in that region now, so just going to try to get a bit of water into that mix. That. I can form a bit of an edge just with some water. Let that do its thing for a moment. I think this area is mostly dry, but what I can do is just go through with a smaller flat brush and again just get in some more detail in these hills like that. My aim is to just show a bit of separation and between these mountains here and the hills in the background. Sort of bluish ones in the background and these green ones. But not trying to get too much detail in. Okay. I want to just emphasize some of these areas in the lower section because it's closer, especially to the foreground, and the viewer needs to be more detailed. But I don't want to ruin this really nice sort of wet onto wet background effect. Gonna just soften some edges here, especially in the background. Feel that they're sticking out too much. Okay, give this a bit of a dry, and really for the last bit I'll add in some bits and pieces. Okay, now for this last part I'm gonna be getting in some shrubs, trees and things like that with my trusty fan brush. There's also a little path kind of going through here which I'm thinking I might use a bit of opaque paint to indicate. Maybe reinforce some of these rows as well with some dry brush. But firstly I'm going to get in some of these little shrubs. Let me just pick out a smaller flat brush. I'm thinking what I'll do is a teeny bit of negative painting. Some sap green here. Okay. Just a bit of wet on dry. Let's indicate some of these shrubs. I'm not sure what they are, but they're kind of smaller looking shrubs. Leave bits of this yellow and lighter green in as well. That's really going to help. Just indicating. And it kind of moves into this bigger tree up here, which we've already got in from the previous wash. However, I just want to darken the edges a bit in the corner. It's kind of look like highlights, and I don't really like those. So swapping to a smaller brush now. This is a rigger. I'm going to be picking up some sepia or brown paint. Let's get that sepia and get it pretty thick. Okay, and here I'm just, oops, it's too wet. You want to get it pretty thick so that it's almost pure paint. And using a bit of dry brush, indicate some branches just reaching out towards the sky. This. I find just bits of detail like this really help when you've got a looser painting style for other sections. That bit of tree there is just bugging me because it's too sort of obvious. And what I'll do, I'm going to actually try to get some darker paint mixed in with this sap green. Just do a bit of dabbing like that. Apply some leaves reaching out. Here. Okay. I'm just going to darken here as well. Okay. Bit of dry brush down the bottom here. Don't want to overdo it. I'm going to experiment a bit and see if we can just darken a bit of these areas near the bottom. Let's give that a go. Like that. So this is just some dry brush. Like that. Just to help reinforce some of these areas a bit. But again, don't want to overdo it. The wet into wet looks pretty good already. Just sort of define some of these undulations. Okay. Picking up some blue, mixing it with this green, sap green. Gonna go ahead and get in this shrub in the corner, or tree. Okay. A teeny bit darker. There's one here too. So I'll get in. The trick is to really not spend too much time fiddling around with them. As soon as they start looking alright, then just stop. I won't go any further with that one. And there's, little ones in the distance, which you can pretty much imply this way. find these little trees in the background do help with the perspective and creating that feeling of depth in the painting. I mean, this area has some trees and here as well. Go and dip a bit in this corner. Notice I'm using my finger as well just to sort of soften some of the edges. Okay. And this is pretty much done. I can keep on going and adding lots of little things in here and getting it more and more detailed, but you'll find at this stage about 70 to 80% of the painting is finished. You can even call it finished at this point, and if you want to add more details in and stuff like that later, it's up to you. I find the last 20 to 30% of the painting where you're just adding in details here and there takes a really long time, depending on how far you want to go. But let's add in some birds, help break up this sky a bit. There we go, we're finished.